Statewide minimum wage hike for fast food workers is now set at $20 an hour. It was designed to help struggling employees, but a new study from UC Santa Cruz suggests it may be doing the complete opposite.
So a new study just dropped, and it has reported what we all suspected it was going to prove out, that California's $20 fast food wage has been an abject disaster for the state of California's fast food industry. And not only that, it's also had really bad impacts on the rest of the state, which, by the way, has something like a $16.90 minimum wage statewide. And the reason for this is absolutely obvious. When you try to increase the price of labor, that ends up getting passed on to the consumer. A lot of restaurants have, again, low profit margins. And in addition to that, a lack of consumption of the product, this being a more expensive fast food, ends up leading to lower revenues that has to go more and more to those higher wages. But it's actually significantly worse than that, and I think this is worthy of a discussion because, again, we see these policies being pushed across the nation, and what the data shows us time and time again is that if you want to help these workers, you should actually do the exact opposite of what California did. So this is what we're going to talk about. This is what we're going to discuss, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money, okay?
If they had stopped paying the rent here and all that, I wish they had notified us then.
Employees at Mod Pizza in Clovis are now saying corporate shut the store without notice, and they say the timing is suspect.
Yeah, Monty and Liz, both the employees who I spoke to actually wanted to remain anonymous, but they did tell me that if they knew that the minimum raise for fast food workers were going to come out like this, that they probably wouldn't have voted for the law.
So before we get into the study, I wanted to cut back to this report because it's nearly 2 years old, coming out on April 3rd of 2024, right as the $20 minimum wage was coming into effect. And it actually has a reporter featured, as you just heard right there, saying that the employees who were laid off suddenly, basically overnight, ended up telling her, well, if we knew the minimum wage increase on fast food jobs was going to result in us being fired, we likely would not have voted for that particular initiative because obviously it backfired in our faces. And the thing is, this is a perfect example of the lack of education on economics in our society, because everybody will tell you that obviously this is going to have negative consequences, at least on the margins. No studies except for fake ones from activist universities end up rejecting this, yet these people thought they were just going to be able to vote themselves into higher pay without any negative consequences. And this is what happens when people don't believe in economics, don't understand what trade-offs actually are, and think vote for things that sound good will produce good results. I'm against bad things bad, good things be good. So if I vote for the gooder sounding things, things will be much gooder for me and my life, and now I don't have a job, and I'm so confused by it.
Kind of seemed, the right timing 2 weeks before all of the fast food locations in California got that increase that we closed.
That's what the former assistant manager of Mod Pizza is saying after its Clovis location is now closed, empty and stripped.
Personally, if they would have gone about it in a better way, I feel like I would feel better about it. But just the lack of notice and all of a sudden just, the axe for everybody is just really disheartening.
Both employees I spoke with wanted to remain anonymous because they say Mod Pizza made them sign a non-disclosure agreement. Both tell me they were completely in the dark until 2 days before their final shift.
So first of all, you guys know how I feel about the non-disclosure agreements. It seems rather weird for a fast food pizza chain in order to do that, and that precludes you from talking about you being fired and how upset you are for being fired. So I don't like that at all whatsoever. But again, this guy's upset. He's like, oh, I wish it would have shook out differently. I wish things would have worked out better. And by the way, this was one of 27 stores that closed in the state of California, all around the same time, again, right before the minimum wage ended up kicking in. And this is because restaurants typically have low profit margins. Even though you're part of a big franchise like McDonald's or Burger King or whatever, a lot of times these are owned by franchise owners, so they don't have the big corporate profits of big corporate McDonald's. Say corporate a lot, and then it makes it okay to pass these stupid policies that actually negatively impact the workers that are supposed to benefit from them. And yeah, this was totally predictable. It was totally understandable understandable that this was likely to happen. People were warned about this time and time again, but it actually ends up proving out to be significantly worse when we have this new study. But just for a moment, I want to throw out this thought experiment for you guys out there in the audience so you could really understand how everybody understands, at least at a certain point, that the minimum wage being raised to a certain level will obviously have negative consequences, because this one was $20 for fast food workers, and we're seeing all this backlash. But a lot of people don't think that sounds like a lot. They're like, California's really expensive, that wage is definitely worth it. But what if it were $100? What if it were $1,000? Like, obviously you gotta get at some point in time that if you're raising the cost of the minimum wage, you're going to end up with less employment because people are not going to be able to afford to pay that. Usually we understand that, usually we can get on board with that, but for whatever reason, this is really confusing, especially on what people think is on the margins in terms of this policy, as minimum wage increases, whenever they're put on a ballot initiative, almost always pass, again, no matter what state essentially that it's put in.
Before the wage increase, they had a certain amount of hours. They're going to end up with the same check because their hours are severely decreased.
It's survival mode. We continue to read and see in real time, owners that are upgrading, they're getting kiosks, they're not having people work as many hours, people aren't getting overtime. People aren't expanding in the state of California.
Now, again, I told you that there were warnings well in advance of the minimum wage increase, where people talked about reduction in hours, raises in prices, stores closing, a switch to automation, and it turns out all of those warnings that were given before the minimum wage increase, that again, California Democrats were oh so proud of, ended up coming to fruition. They ended up happening exactly as predicted, and by the way, even some other consequences that were predicted but not as well advertised also ended up happening. Because what ends up happening in a state where you take a job that pretty much anyone can do, I'm not saying that it can't be difficult or people who are in fast food don't work hard, but it is considered low skilled work because you can easily teach the skills for a reason. I mean, again, most of these fast food places are essentially fast food assembly lines, not actually restaurants, is that you get an increase in applications when you artificially increase the wages. So what we end up seeing is not only that there are fewer positions, and by the way, there's reduced hours in those positions, but the higher wage ends up drawing in significantly more applicants. So people who used to get this as their first job because it wasn't very competitive in order to do so are now competing with a huge portion of the population that otherwise would not be interested in this. And by the way, many of those people have significantly more experience. So what ends up happening is people who would use this as their first job, their stepping stone to get in the labor market, to prove that they have skills, to prove that they could show up on time, to prove that they're reliable in order to get other jobs, are actually being priced out of the market by their wage, and they're being outcompeted for fewer and fewer positions. In addition to that, because the statewide minimum wage is $16.90, there's a bunch of places that are having trouble hiring people due to the fact that the fast food work, which is much easier in a lot of regards, is paying significantly more as prescribed by law. So essentially, you're in a situation where it's artificially forcing up wages and thus prices in other areas. And by the way, this is not surprising. Again, unions advocate for an increase in the minimum wage, and the reason they do this, even though their workers make well above the minimum wage because they negotiate their own contracts via the union, is if they can increase the floor on wages, that can help them better leverage their power in order to get higher wages for their union members. So yeah, the whole point of this policy by the people who are actually backing it, that are not the useful idiots who vote for something and then get shocked when they lose their job, even though every single warning about this policy is that you will lose your job, is to actually cut off these jobs and again, raise the wages of a different set of workers, the union workers, because you're like, look, how can you pay me $25 an hour when over at McDonald's, they're paying $20 an hour by law? And by the way, California also instituted one of these boards on their minimum wage that automatically will increase it 3.5% unless the board votes otherwise, and they can also increase the wage in a similar way that the Rent Stabilization and Rent Control Board can, to higher rates, again, depending on political pressure and circumstances.
Yeah, Fox 26 News reporter Myra Franco breaks down the findings for us and what it reveals. Myra.
The study shows more people are applying for fast food jobs, but many are not seeing increased hours or even securing employment at all. It also finds businesses are cutting shifts, customers are paying higher prices, and more machines are replacing workers.
And once again, the question is being raised by another study, this one from UC Santa Cruz. The report shows many of the same trends still playing out. Researchers talk about how the $20 fast food minimum wage has created unintended consequences across the industry. We heard that then.
Now, the numbers are even more devastating than you can possibly imagine because California has reportedly lost between 16 and 19,000 jobs, some estimates putting that number closer to 25,000 jobs since the implementation of this minimum wage law. And by the way, with more losses coming each and every year, they've actually seen a contraction in their fast food employment, which ranges from negative 2.7% to negative 3.8%. And this is while nationwide, we're seeing a 5% increase in fast food labor force. So obviously something incredibly different is going on in the state of California. And this is due to the fact that they increased the wages of this specific industry. I mean, this is why we do studies. This is why we do comparative analysis. And when you see an industry that's growing everywhere across the country, by the way, that's seeing some natural wage increases due to the labor crunch. And then in California, it's declining by 3% or 4%, which by the way is a negative 9% swing compared to the national average, which is an increase of 5% in this kind of employment. It's a disaster. Obviously, they're going more towards automation, automatic kiosks for ordering. They're trying to use capital to substitute for labor. And in addition to that, prices in California are up 13% since this particular increase went into effect. And that's after we already saw significant jumps in fast food prices prior to this. Now, of course, this obviously creates what is known as a death spiral because you can't perpetually increase prices in order to chase revenue. Obviously, the consumers are revolting. And while it might be good for the health of the United States of America that people are reducing their fast food consumption, in reality, it is not good for the very workers that you are trying to help because once you have a decrease in consumption, that's lower revenues, which leads to more layoffs or more attempts at automation to keep prices down, which again, if prices still go up, then you have another situation where people stop consuming. So then you end up in this whole cycle where employment is on a downward trajectory. And again, this is very disproportionately in California's fast food industry. Now, there are a lot of not smarts out there. I believe the technical term is dumbasses that will tell you, well, it's not the minimum wage because in reality, if you look at the restaurants that are closing, they also have poor sales and then, they just close after the minimum wage. Therefore, it's no big deal. As if, again, the minimum wage doesn't add to the cost of restaurants that may have already been struggling and thus accelerates that process. Whether these places could have closed, some of them in the next 10 years or whatever, the next 5 years, makes no matter because in reality, you're accelerating that process. And again, the people that you said you wanted to help, they're the ones suffering. They're the ones who reduce hours. They're the ones that don't have overtime available to them, and they're the ones getting laid off. But you know what? You ignored that. You'll probably vote for it again. We will see this experiment play out time and time again. Then you'll probably vote for more rent control like the absolute idiots that you are. See that fall apart, and we'll be in this cycle for absolutely forever until everybody has left California for a sensible state with sensible policies. But hey, those are just my thoughts. I happen to be 100% right about absolutely everything. And if you disagree with me, feel free to let me know your wrong opinion down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the absolute craziness of California's minimum wage and the new studies that support the fact that it was a failure. Till next time.